All right. Good morning, everyone. Uh, my name is Mustafa El Sefi. I'm a professor of civil engineering at Louisiana State University, and I will be giving the presentation today. So, uh, if we start with a little bit of introduction, thermal segregation is one of the main type of segregation that we encounter in asphalt pavement construction, and it is defined as a difference in temperature of 14 degrees Celsius or more during construction. And temperature differential has been related to accelerated pavement deterioration, which can reach as much as 50% in some locations that are cooler than others that are warmer during construction. So we are trying to avoid thermal segregation as much as possible. If we look at the literature, so they have been reported that the areas that have cooler or lower temperature during construction usually will show increased cracking. Would also, because of the cracking, would have increased roughness, reduced fill density during construction, and increased permeability. So this particular location are very prone to premature failure, which can be a major issue because the pavement will require premature maintenance and rehabilitation. So, as I said, usually to identify thermal segregation is a challenge because you need to measure the temperature during construction. And usually it is only detected after completion of the construction. And the way it is detected is that you will conduct fill density measurement after compaction, and you will find that area have reduced density as compared to other location in the pavement. One of the methods that can be used to detect thermal segregation during construction is to use infrared thermography. And infrared thermography is a method that allows you to detect thermal segregation in real time. And this can be beneficial because if you detect thermal segregation, you can avoid it during construction, and that can be a very big advantage. So a little bit of background about infrared thermography. So infrared thermography is related to the radiation that is emitted by a surface. And this amount of energy that is emitted by the surface can be calculated from the equation shown here, which is a function of the Stefan Boltzmann constant, the emission coefficient of the surface, which needs to be relatively high, and the temperature of the surface. So if you keep the emission coefficient constant, then the amount of energy that is emitted from the surface is a function of the temperature of the surface. To measure the amount of energy that is emitted by the surface, we use infrared camera, such as the one shown here. And this infrared camera uh, allow us to calculate the infrared energy that is emitted by the surface, which can be correlated to the surface temperature. And this camera will display a contour map showing the temperature contour in a pavement surface. And from this contour map, you can detect the locations that have reduced temperature. And these locations are thermally segregated. And this image can be saved in TIFF format. And generally speaking, when you use infrared thermography, you want to compare two locations, so one that is not segregated and one that is segregated. So using these two locations, you can identify segregation in your paving map. So the application of infrared thermography to pavement construction have received wide interest because, as I said, it's non-destructive and it is real time. So this is an example of an infrared image obtained of the paving map. And you can see from this image, we can identify locations that are segregated, usually will have uh, less intensity, and there will be yellow and green. And the areas that are warmer are usually closer to the red color. So uh, what causes thermal segregation? Many things. It can be related to the paver, it can be related to the material uniformity, and so on. So, as I said, this is a very useful technique, and it has received a wide interest in the pavement application. Uh, if we look at this is another example, so you can see here the mix that is being laid out by the paver is highly segregated because you have non-uniform temperature. In another picture here shown on the right, you can see that there is a wide difference in temperature. At some location it's 249, at another location it's 210. So obviously there is a very high thermal segregation happening here. Uh, so the effect of thermal segregation is the same as if you are not compacting your mix. So that's a very bad thing. So it can increase raveling. Uh, the mix is more permeable, so it increases moisture damage. It will reduce the fatigue life, and it will increase the roughness. And they found that, generally speaking, a reduction in air void uh, of 1% is usually associated, or an increase in air void of 1% will cause a 10% reduction in pavement life. So that, as I said, it's a very significant factor. Usually, thermal segregation can be quite significant if there is a temperature differential of 25 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius. So these are the two thresholds that have been suggested in the literature. This graph here shows that there is a very close relationship between the decrease in temperature, shown in red, and the decrease in density. So again, density is a very clear uh, factor that shows how good your construction is. So you can see that the cooler the mix, the less the unit weight, and that means that you have more air void and you have a permeable mix, and that would cause premature failure. One option, one option that has been used in recent year is to use a material transverse vehicle, or MTV, and this particular equipment is very good at getting the mix from the truck, remixing it, making sure it's uniform, and then it's passing it to the paver. So usually the use of an MTV is very effective in reducing thermal segregation. So the objective of our study was related to thermal segregation is that we wanted to see what is the effect of discontinuities in the existing pavement on the uniformity of the overlay that is being constructed on top of it. So again, think of it, you have a concrete pavement, for example, and you are going to place an overlay on top of it, and you want to see how does the presence of the joint or extensive cracking will affect thermal segregation in your paving map. So to do that, we use infrared thermography, and this particular location we monitored them during construction. And just to give you an idea, is that usually the joint is a very problematic location for the overlay, because this is where reflective cracking will appear. So if you have a poor mix at this location, That means that you will have premature failure against reflective crack. So to build on our field measurement, we also added or complemented our analysis using finite element analysis, and I'm going to show you the results in this presentation. So field measurements were conducted at 3 projects. They are all in Louisiana, and one of them was built on top of a concrete pavement. The second was on top of a milled surface with extensive cracking, and the third was on top of an unmilled surface. And on these 3 projects, we collected infrared measurements using this camera shown in this slide, and we kept monitoring the temperature during paving and during compaction. And we plotted the temperature measurement over time that we obtained from this field measurement. So the result of the field measurement for the first project, it was placed over a milled surface. So this is how the pavement looked like. And you can see there is a big crack here on the visual picture. So what we did is that we monitored the temperature at this particular location, and we also monitored away from the crack. And we compared the measurement on top of the crack and away from the crack. And we found that there is really no segregation, thermal segregation issue in this project. So generally speaking, the difference was not more than 2 degrees Celsius. So that means that there is no thermal segregation in this project. And the second project was on top of the concrete pavement. So what we did is that we also focused on the joint. And you can see that there was an MTV used in this particular project. And as expected, we did not find significant thermal segregation in this project, but we measured the temperature change on top of the joint and away from the joint. So we can see whether there is a significant difference in temperature between the 2 locations. And what we found is that at the joint, the temperature was consistently lower than away from the joint. And I'm going to show you the results in the next few slides. In the third project, so this project was unmilled. And in that case, we also compared the temperature during paving and during compaction. And it seems that there was some non-uniformity, but again, it was not to the level where you can assess it as thermally segregated. So there was a large differential, but it was not as severe to be assessed as thermally segregated. So for the field measurement, we found that there was no sign of thermal segregation. However, what we found, if you look at this graph here, is that above the joint, which is the graph at the bottom here, you can see that there is consistently lower temperature as compared to away from the joint. And what this means is that you have more temperature loss at the joint as compared to away from the joint. And that's, again, that indicates that the mix that you place on top of the joint is of less quality than away from the joint. And that can be problematic. So we complemented this result with finite element analysis. So we developed a thermally transient analysis using finite elements. And we simulated exactly what we had in the field. And we had a concrete layer. And on top of it, we had an asphalt overlay being placed. And we conducted the analysis for 15 minutes. So basically, you start with the hot paving mat, and these paving mats keep on cooling over time. And we studied the location at the joint and away from the joint. So before we did that, we wanted to validate the model, and that was done by comparing the measurement obtained from the model to the measurement obtained from the field. And as I said, uh, we we did a case where there was no temperature segregation, and we did a case where there was a temperature differential of 8.24 degrees Celsius at time 0. So these are the two cases. These are the comparison between the model and the field measurement. And you can see that there was a very good agreement between the two set of data. So obviously, in the field, you can have some deviation that cannot be explained by the model, but overall, the results were very good, were in very good agreement, which was very promising. And when we compare to the case where we had segregation, so this was another location, and you can see that also the model did a very good job in predicting the field measurement, and that supported the validity of the model. And what we did next is that we wanted to look at the variation of the temperature of the paving mat through depth. And obviously, that's not something you can do in the field because our measurement in the field are at the surface. So we looked at the variation of the temperature at the bottom of the paving mat. And you can see there is a there is a significant difference at the joint and away from the joint. So why this is happening? Because uh, first, at the bottom of the overlay, you have more temperature loss because your underlying concrete layer is not heated. So you have significant loss to the concrete layer. And also at the joint is filled with air. So you get a lot of convection loss at the joint. And that's why you can see here above the joint and away from the joint, there is a significant difference in temperature. So what does this mean is that during construction, you can get significant temperature segregation, not only at the surface, but also at the bottom of your overlay. We also looked at the variation through depth. And this graph here, it shows you that at the bottom of the overlay, there is a significant temperature differential if you compare it to the top of the overlay. So, for example, at the top here, you have this temperature. And if you follow this curve, you see that you have a much lower temperature at the bottom. So this was also a significant finding from this study is that temperature differential does not only happen in the horizontal distance, it also happens throughout the depth of the overlay. And that's something that is not considered in the literature. So you can also see that, again, why do we get such a loss at the bottom? Because the concrete layer is not heated. And at the same time, you have a significant loss of temperature when the paving mat gets in contact with the concrete layer. And this loss is even more significant at the joint as compared to away from the joint. So in conclusion, based on field measurement, we found that usually the cracks are not a significant factor when it comes to temperature differential. However, the joints appear to be a significant factor since we found that the temperature at the joint was significantly lower than away from the joint. Based on the finite element model, we found that there is a significant thermal loss at the bottom of the overlay, especially above the joint. And we found that thermal segregation only happen in the vertical and horizontal direction. And that's a factor that has not been considered so far. And also the third conclusion that we found from the finite element model is that we have, throughout the depths, we found that there is lower temperature at the top and at the bottom. So in the middle of the AC overlay, the loss in temperature is not as significant as the top and the bottom of the overlay. So with that, I conclude, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
All right, great. Thank you very much. We do have a few minutes for questions. I'm not sure the best way to do this. I'll start by just opening up for questions, and if it becomes too unwieldy, we'll go to a hand raising process. But I will open it up for questions.
Can I give back the screen to you? So
yes, you can stop sharing your screen. That's fine.
So stop sharing.
Yes, there you go. Okay. That's perfect. Okay, any questions? Any questions for Dr. El-Saifi?
All right, so if again you have any question after the presentation, feel free to email me. I'm teaching at 10:30, so I will have to leave, but again, you know how to reach me if you have any questions.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, excellent. We had a question come up on the chat I had about the availability of slides and information. So for this conference, all of the presenters have written a paper that gives the details of their research work. And these presentations are a summary sort of the detailed written work. Those papers, those conference papers are going to be published through ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers. So they will be available in published form. In addition, if you do, feel free to reach out to any of our individual presenters. Most of them are academics at universities and are very happy to talk with folks from industry or other colleagues about their work. So do feel free to reach out if one of these topics does ring a bell with you or something that you're very interested in. All right,